My mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Your sister's coming with her 2 kids to live with us, so you need to leave, you parasite." I blinked. "You're joking, right?" She laughed. "No, I'm serious." The next morning, while she left to go pick them up, I packed everything, changed the locks, and moved out. Now she's calling me in a panic, and I'm not answering. Can you imagine someone you sacrificed everything for? Your career, your savings, your very independence, looking you straight in the eye and calling you a parasite? Because that's exactly what my own mother did to me. After 3 years of putting my life on hold for her, she tried to throw me out of my own home, all for my sister, Jessica, a sister who hadn't spoken to us in years. I actually laughed when she said it, thinking it had to be a joke. My mom wasn't joking. Before that conversation, my life, as Audrey, was pretty straightforward. I was the responsible one, the daughter who always did the right thing. When my dad passed away from a sudden heart attack 3 years ago, it didn't just shatter our family. It felt like the world stopped spinning. My mom, Barbara, just shattered. It was like watching the light drain from her. She plunged into a deep depression. Her health, already fragile, began to decline rapidly, arthritis flaring, blood pressure spiking. And then there were the bills. Dad had some life insurance, but it barely covered the mortgage and their mounting debts. I was living in a small apartment about 30 minutes away, working as an administrative assistant at Thompson Marketing. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid the rent, and there was potential for growth. When I saw Mom struggling, lost in her grief and overwhelmed by everything, the decision felt obvious. Heartbreakingly obvious. I gave up my lease, packed up my modest life, and moved back into my childhood bedroom to help her get back on her feet. It'll just be temporary, I told myself, trying to believe it. 6 months, maybe a year at most. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I'd fallen into a relentless routine. My alarm buzzed at 6 a.m. I'd wake up, prepare breakfast for both of us, and make sure Mom took her medications. Then it was off to work, often staying late when needed, picking up groceries on the way home. Weekends? Those were for cleaning the house, tackling the yard work Dad used to do, and handling all the maintenance issues. To make ends meet, I even picked up a side gig, doing bookkeeping for a few local businesses. I paid nearly 70% of the bills, the mortgage, utilities, groceries, most of Mom's medical expenses not covered by insurance. It was a massive financial commitment, but it made sense for both of us, even if it meant putting my own dreams on hold. Despite the challenges, Mom and I actually grew closer. We'd cook dinner together most nights, watching reruns of crime shows, discussing the cases like amateur detectives. We shared secrets, stories. On good days, she'd even tell me about her adventures with Dad when they were young, before they had me and my sister, Jessica. I treasured those moments, catching glimpses of the vibrant woman she used to be. My sister Jessica was a different story entirely. 2 years younger than me, she'd always been the wild child, impulsive, quick to anger, always chasing the next big thing. While I stayed close to home for college to help with family expenses, Jessica had vanished across the country to California. After a string of failed relationships and job changes, she finally met a guy, got married quickly, and had 2 kids, Emma and Tyler. We hadn't seen her since Dad's funeral, and even then, she'd stayed only long enough for the service before rushing back to her life. "Your sister needs to find herself," Mom would often say whenever I brought up Jessica's absence, especially during the holidays or when Mom genuinely needed extra help. "She's sensitive. Different than you." I had my own dreams, modest as they were. I was slowly saving to start my own small business someday, a bookkeeping service for local businesses. I loved bringing order to chaos, making numbers balance, helping people understand their finances. But that goal seemed to drift further and further away with each bill that arrived. My best friend, Rachel, constantly told me I was being taken advantage of. "You're putting your life on hold for someone who wouldn't do the same for you," she'd say during our monthly lunch dates at the small Italian restaurant downtown. "She's my mother," I always responded, my voice tight. "What else can I do?" Then, about 6 months ago, things started to change. Mom met Gerald at her church group, a retired accountant with thinning gray hair and a booming laugh. He started coming over for dinner, then staying late into the evening. Mom seemed happier, more energetic. She started coloring her hair again, buying new clothes. I was genuinely happy for her. After years of grieving Dad, she deserved some joy. And if I occasionally felt like a third wheel in my own home, I pushed those feelings aside. This was progress. This was healing. Maybe soon she'll be ready for me to move out, I told Rachel hopefully. Get my own place again. Start building my own life. I believed our arrangement was temporary. I believed my sacrifices were appreciated. I believed family looked out for each other, no matter what. I was wrong about all of it. The changes were subtle at first, so gradual I almost didn't notice them. Mom became increasingly critical of my housekeeping, even though I'd been maintaining the house the same way for years. The kitchen floor is sticky, she'd complain one morning, though I'd mopped it the night before. This laundry has been sitting here for days, she'd note, pointing to a basket I'd folded just hours earlier. My cooking, once praised, now received lukewarm responses. It's a bit bland, isn't it? Or, I can't eat spicy food anymore. Gerald's visits increased, and with them came sidelong glances and whispered comments. Still living at home at your age, he asked once, not quite under his breath, while helping himself to the dinner I'd prepared. I brushed it off. Mom was happy, and that's what mattered. If Gerald was the price of her happiness, I could tolerate his presence. Then came the phone call. I was washing dishes one evening when the house phone rang. Mom rushed to answer it, turning away from me as she spoke. Jessica. It's so good to hear your voice, she gushed, practically running into the living room for privacy. Jessica. My sister, who hadn't called on Mom's birthday, who sent generic gift cards at Christmas with no personal note, who hadn't asked once how Mom was coping after Dad died. The call lasted over an hour. When Mom finally emerged, her eyes were bright with excitement. Jessica just wanted to catch up, she said vaguely when I asked. She's going through some changes. After that, Mom started receiving regular calls, always taking them in her bedroom with the door closed. She became secretive, changing subjects when I entered rooms, hiding her phone screen. One day, I found brochures for local schools on the kitchen counter. What are these for? I asked, holding them up. Just gathering information, Mom replied, snatching them away. For a church project. Our church didn't have any education projects that I knew of, and Mom hadn't mentioned any. Is everything okay with Jessica? I tried again. Are her kids needing new schools? Mind your own business, Audrey, she snapped, shocking me with her tone. Not everything is your concern. I tried discussing my concerns with Rachel over coffee the following weekend. Something's going on, I told her. Mom's hiding something about Jessica. Maybe Jessica is in trouble again? Rachel suggested. Remember when she needed that money for rent after her second breakup? I nodded, remembering the $1,000 I'd lent my sister. Money I never got back. Just ask your mom directly, Rachel advised. You deserve to know what's happening in your own home. But every attempt at direct conversation was met with evasion or criticism. The next concerning incident happened when I came home early from work with a migraine. I felt Mom in my bedroom, sorting through my closet, a large donation box already half full with my clothes. What are you doing? I asked, my head pounding. Spring cleaning, she replied, though it was October. You never wear half of these things. Some of the items in the box were clothes I'd worn just the previous week. I was thinking we could convert this room into a proper guest room, Mom continued, not meeting my eyes. You could move your things to the basement. The basement. It was unfinished, damp, and filled with boxes. It had a small window and concrete floors. Why would I move to the basement? I asked, my voice rising. This has been my room for 3 years. Well, it was your childhood room before that, Mom said dismissively. Don't you think it's time for a change? Gerald started staying overnight more frequently. I'd wake up to find him at the breakfast table in his robe, drinking from my father's favorite mug. He began offering unsolicited financial advice, questioning my contributions to the household. Your mother tells me you've been a big help, he said one morning, in a tone that suggested the opposite. But at your age, shouldn't you be establishing your own household? Mom needs help with the mortgage, I replied evenly. We have an arrangement. Arrangements can change, he said, sharing a look with my mother that made my stomach knot. My anxiety grew. I began having trouble sleeping, lying awake listening to the murmur of voices from my mother's room. Catching fragments of sentences, plenty of space once, we need to tell her soon. Jessica's situation is different. I started noticing other changes too. Mom cleared out the storage room upstairs, discarding boxes of holiday decorations and winter clothes. She ordered new twin beds online without explanation. She asked me repeatedly about my work schedule, making notes on the calendar. All signs pointed to something major coming, but I couldn't piece it together. Or perhaps I didn't want to see the truth forming right in front of me. The evening everything fell apart started deceptively well. I came home from work to find Mom cooking lasagna, my favorite meal, with garlic bread and a fresh salad. The table was set nicely, with the good dishes we usually reserved for holidays. What's the occasion? I asked, setting down my purse, a hopeful flutter in my chest. Can a mother make a nice dinner? Mom replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Gerald will be joining us later. Of course he would. I went upstairs to change, noticing more of my belongings had been shifted around. Some family photos removed from my dresser. A sense of unease settled over me, but I pushed it aside. Maybe this dinner was Mom's way of thanking me for everything. When I came back down, Mom was pouring wine, another unusual touch for a weeknight. Sit, she urged, bringing the lasagna to the table. Let's eat while it's hot. The food was delicious, but Mom barely touched hers, instead watching me with an intensity that made me nervous. After a few minutes of strange small talk about the weather, she cleared her throat. Audrey, there's something I need to discuss with you. I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly gone. What is it? Your sister, Jessica, is going through a difficult time, Mom began, her voice carefully neutral. Her divorce was finalized last month, and she's struggling financially. The area they live in is expensive and with 2 growing children. My mind raced, already seeing where this was heading. You want to send her money? I can adjust the budget. Maybe work a few extra bookkeeping hours. Mom shook her head. No, that's not it. Jessica needs more than money. She needs a support system. She took a deep breath. She's moving back home with Emma and Tyler. They'll be here next week. I blinked, processing this information. That's sudden, but I guess we can make it work. The kids can have the guest room, and Jessica could use the office space downstairs. It'll be tight, but Audrey, Mom interrupted, her voice hardening. You don't understand. Jessica will need your room. The children will need space too. You'll need to find another place to live. The words hit like a physical blow. What? My voice rose in disbelief. You're 32, a grown woman, Mom continued, not meeting my eyes. Jessica needs help with her kids. They're only 8 and 6. They need stability, their grandmother's support. And I need to leave? Just like that? After everything I've done here? I pay most of the bills, Mom. I've kept this house running for 3 years while you grieved. Don't exaggerate. Mom snapped. I've contributed my share, and now my daughter needs me. I'm your daughter too. The words burst out of me. Yes, but you're an adult. Jessica is in crisis. Those children need a home. Mom's expression grew cold. And what about our arrangement? The mortgage, the utilities, the groceries I buy? Who's going to handle all of that if I leave? Gerald has offered to help with the finances, and Jessica will contribute when she gets settled. Gerald. Of course. The pieces suddenly fell into place. The secret phone calls, the storage room clean out, the new beds. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. So you're just throwing me out after everything I've sacrificed to help you? I couldn't keep the tremor from my voice. Don't be so dramatic, Audrey. I'm giving you a week's notice. That's generous. Generous? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I've put my entire life on hold for you. I've poured my savings into this house. I've missed career opportunities to stay close and help you. And I appreciate that, Mom said dismissively. But it's time for you to move on. Jessica's situation is different. She has children to consider. And what about my situation? Where am I supposed to go with 1 week's notice? How am I supposed to find an apartment and move that quickly? You're resourceful, Mom replied. You've always been independent, unlike Jessica, who needs more support. The injustice of it burned in my chest. So Jessica disappears for years, doesn't help when Dad dies, doesn't call, doesn't visit, and she gets rewarded with a place to live? While I, who've been here supporting you every day, get thrown out like garbage. Mom's eyes flashed. That's enough. I won't be spoken to like that in my own home. You've been living here rent-free. Rent-free. I nearly shouted. I pay the mortgage. I pay the utilities. I buy the groceries. I've spent thousands maintaining this house. And you've had a place to live. Mom countered. Now you're just being selfish. Jessica needs help. Those children need stability. And what about what I need? My voice broke. You're being a parasite, Mom hissed, the words slicing through me. Clinging to your childhood home instead of building your own life. It's not healthy, Audrey. A parasite. After everything I'd done, everything I'd given up, the word echoed in my mind as tears threatened to spill. The front door opened and Gerald walked in, his timing suspiciously perfect. Everything okay in here? He asked, looking between us with artificial concern. Fine, Mom said, composing herself instantly. I've just informed Audrey about Jessica's arrival next week. Gerald nodded, settling his hand on Mom's shoulder possessively. It'll be good for Barbara to have her grandchildren here. Family is important. Yes, I said bitterly, the taste of bile in my mouth. Family is important. Apparently, some family more than others. I stood up from the table, my dinner barely touched. I need some air. Audrey. Mom called as I headed for the door. Be reasonable. You have until next Friday. Jessica's flight arrives at noon. I didn't respond. Just grabbed my keys and walked out. In my car, parked on the street I'd grown up on, I finally let the tears fall. Not just for the betrayal of tonight, but for the 3 years I'd wasted, believing I was valued, appreciated, needed. I'd been nothing more than a placeholder, a convenient solution until something better, someone better, came along. I drove aimlessly for hours, finally ending up at a small, 24-hour diner on the edge of town. The waitress, an older woman named Patty with kind eyes, took one look at my tear-stained face and brought me a cup of hot chocolate without asking. On the house, honey, she said, setting it in front of me. Whatever it is, it looks like you could use it. I sat there until nearly midnight, nursing my drink and trying to process what had happened. A parasite. The word kept echoing in my head, each repetition a fresh wound. How could Mom see me that way after everything I'd done? When I finally returned home, the house was dark. I crept up to my room and closed the door quietly, leaning against it as fresh tears threatened. Looking around at the space I'd occupied since childhood, I noticed how much had already changed. My bookshelf had been partially emptied, photo frames removed, closet half cleared. They'd been erasing me, gradually preparing for my departure long before telling me. I pulled out an old photo album from under my bed, one thing they hadn't found yet. Inside were pictures of our family when it had been happy and whole. Dad teaching me to ride a bike. Mom braiding my hair for the first day of school. Jessica and me building sandcastles at the beach. The 4 of us at my college graduation, smiling proudly. Where had that family gone? When had I become disposable? I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made. The job opportunity in Seattle I'd turned down because it was too far for Mom. The dating relationships I'd let fizzle out because I didn't have time between work and caring for the house. The $7,000 from my savings that had gone toward the new roof last year. The nights I'd stayed up researching Mom's medications, coordinating her doctor's appointments, managing her care. All of it meaningless now. All of it forgotten. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, replaying the conversation, thinking of all the things I should have said. By morning, my eyes were swollen and my head pounded, but I forced myself to get up and face the day. I went downstairs early, hoping to avoid Mom, but she and Gerald were already in the kitchen. They fell silent when I entered. Morning, I said stiffly, pouring myself coffee. Neither responded. I stood at the counter, back to them, listening to their hushed conversation. The smaller bedroom would be perfect for Tyler, Gerald was saying. Emma can have the larger one since she's older. We'll need to repaint, Mom replied. Audrey's taste is so drab. Emma loves purple. They were already planning the renovation of my room, the room I was still occupying. The betrayal cut deeper. After they left for Gerald's doctor's appointment, I sat at the kitchen table trying to form a plan. I needed an apartment, moving help, money for deposits and furniture. A week wasn't enough time. Out of habit, I checked the household accounts on my laptop. We had a joint checking account for bills and household expenses. I'd always been transparent about the finances, showing Mom every transaction, discussing major expenditures. The balance was $960, significantly lower than it should have been. Scrolling through recent transactions, I found a withdrawal of $3,000 2 days earlier. Money that had been earmarked for winter heating bills and property taxes. My hands shook as I clicked through to the transaction details. The withdrawal had been made by Barbara Sullivan, my mother, at the bank branch downtown. No explanation, no discussion with me beforehand. $3,000. My money. Primarily money I'd worked extra hours to save. As I sat there, staring at the screen, an email notification popped up. It was from Mom's account to her friend Linda. She'd accidentally copied me, or more likely, she'd meant to email Jessica Sullivan and hit Audrey Sullivan in her contacts instead. The subject line read, bedroom furniture. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Linda found the perfect bunk beds for the kids at West Side Furniture. Gerald thinks we should wait until Audrey's out before delivery, but Jessica says they can be stored in the garage temporarily. So excited to have my real family home again. Barbara, my real family. The words were a knife to my heart. I scrolled down to see the previous messages in the thread. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. Weeks of correspondence about Jessica's return, discussions of how to handle the Audrey situation, complaints about my presence in the house. She's become so entitled, Mom had written in one email. Acting like the house is half hers because she pays some bills. Some bills? I paid almost everything. Jessica needs a fresh start, another email read. The kids deserve their grandmother's full attention. Not shared with their aunt who refuses to launch her own life. I closed the laptop, feeling physically ill. How long had this been planned? How long had I been the obstacle to their perfect family reunion? As if on cue, the house phone rang. I let it go to voicemail, then listened as Jessica's voice filled the kitchen. Mom, it's me. Just checking that everything's on track for next week. You're sure Audrey will be out in time? I don't want any drama with the kids there. Call me back. I played the message twice, listening to my sister's entitled tone. She hadn't spoken to me directly in over 2 years, and now she was orchestrating my eviction without so much as a conversation. The phone rang again almost immediately. This time, I heard Mom's voice as the answering machine picked up. Jessica, honey, it's Mom. Yes, everything's on schedule. Don't worry about Audrey. She always does what I tell her. She'll be gone before you arrive. Call me later about the school enrollment forms. Always does what I tell her. The words echoed in my head, illuminating a lifetime pattern I'd been too close to see. I'd always been the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who sacrificed. Jessica had always been the one who needed help, who deserved compassion, who required support. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn the love Mom gave Jessica freely, and I never would. That afternoon, I had a scheduled meeting with my boss, Mrs. Kendall, about quarterly targets. At the end of our discussion, she mentioned an opportunity. We're expanding the digital marketing department, she said. There's a senior administrative position opening up, more responsibility, better pay, potential for advancement. I thought of you immediately, Audrey. In the past, I would have hesitated, thinking about my commitments at home. But today, something had shifted. I'd be very interested, I replied, my voice firm. What would the hours be like? It would require some evenings, occasional weekends during campaigns. Definitely more of a commitment than your current role. I can do that, I said, a strange sense of clarity emerging through the pain. My situation at home has changed. I have much more flexibility now. Mrs. Kendall looked pleased. Excellent. Let's discuss details next week. Walking back to my desk, I felt a strange sense of clarity emerging through the pain. For 3 years, I'd been a doormat, allowing myself to be used because it was easier than standing up for myself. Because I thought that's what family did for each other. But family didn't do what Mom and Jessica were doing to me. Family didn't discard someone who had given everything. Family didn't call you a parasite while taking your money. That night, alone in my room, I made a decision. I wouldn't be a doormat anymore. I wouldn't leave my home of 3 years with my tail between my legs, grateful for a week's generous notice. I would take control of the situation, and I would make sure Mom and Jessica understood exactly what they were losing. The next morning, I emerged from my room with a new attitude. I smiled at Mom over breakfast, agreed with Gerald's inane comments about the weather, and announced I'd be spending the weekend with Rachel to start planning my move. "That's good," Mom said, clearly surprised by my lack of resistance. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." "Of course," I replied pleasantly. "Family helps family, right?" The confusion on her face was satisfying. She'd expected tears, arguments, begging. Not calm acceptance. Instead of going to Rachel's, I drove to see Laura Peterson, a friend from college who had become an attorney specializing in housing law. Over coffee in her office, I laid out the situation. "So, basically, I've been paying most of the household expenses for 3 years, including the mortgage, but my name isn't on the deed," I concluded. "Now I'm being told to leave with 1 week's notice. What are my rights here?" Laura listened attentively, making occasional notes. "Based on what you've described, you're legally a tenant, even without a formal lease. In this state, your mother would need to provide at least 30 days written notice to terminate your tenancy. 1 week is insufficient under the law. And the money I've contributed? The joint account she withdrew from." "That's trickier," Laura admitted. "Joint accounts legally allow either party to withdraw funds. However, given the circumstances, we could make a case for financial reimbursement based on your contributions to the household, especially for permanent improvements like the roof." She outlined my options, from formal legal action to negotiated settlements. I didn't want a protracted legal battle with my own mother, but I also refused to be taken advantage of anymore. "What would you recommend?" I asked. "Start by documenting everything," Laura advised. "Gather evidence of your financial contributions, any written agreements, even text messages about household arrangements. Then, secure new housing before confronting the situation." Position of strength, Audrey. I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "One more question. If I'm legally a tenant, what happens if my landlord leaves the property and attempts to prevent me from accessing my residence?" Laura smiled slightly. "As a tenant with established residency, you have the right to maintain access to your home until proper eviction procedures have been followed." Armed with legal knowledge, I began methodical preparations. First, I contacted Rachel, who had a friend in property management. By Saturday afternoon, I was touring apartments with Mr. Harrison, a kindly older gentleman who owned several small buildings in town. "This one just became available," he said, showing me a 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor of a well-maintained building. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and quiet. Most of the tenants have been here for years." The apartment was small but bright, with hardwood floors and large windows. At $850 per month, it was at the upper limit of what I could afford alone, but it was available immediately. "I'll take it," I said decisively. "Can I move in next weekend?" Mr. Harrison seemed surprised by my eagerness, but pleased. "Certainly. Let's go back to my office and handle the paperwork." Using my lunch breaks the following week, I quietly opened a new bank account at a different bank and transferred my personal savings there. I calculated a strict budget, factoring in rent, utilities, and living expenses without the cushion of sharing costs with Mom. After work each day, I sorted through my belongings, separating the essential from the optional. Clothes, personal documents, and irreplaceable items were packed first into suitcases I stored in my car trunk. Books, kitchen items I'd purchased, and electronics followed, smuggled out in small batches. My coworker, Michael, who owned a pickup truck, agreed to help with larger items on Saturday. "Moving day is always better with free pizza and beer," he joked when I offered to pay him. I made an appointment with a locksmith for Friday morning, explaining my situation carefully and confirming they could come exactly at 9:30 a.m. I requested copies of all utility bills, bank statements, and home repair receipts, creating a folder of documentation as Laura had suggested. Throughout the week, I maintained the charade of reluctant acceptance. I responded to Mom's thinly veiled excitement about Jessica's arrival with mild pleasantness. I answered Gerald's probing questions about my moving plans with vague assurances. Found a place yet? He asked over dinner Wednesday night. Working on it, I replied noncommittally. It's a tight market. You could always stay with a friend temporarily, Mom suggested, clearly concerned I might try to extend my stay. I'll figure something out, I said, with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. By Thursday evening, most of my essential belongings had been relocated to the new apartment or Rachel's garage. Mom had noticed some missing items, but seemed to attribute it to my spring cleaning efforts rather than systematic moving. The moment of truth arrived Friday morning. Mom came downstairs dressed for the airport run, her purse over her arm. I'm picking up Jessica and the kids at noon, she announced unnecessarily. Gerald will meet us there. We should be back around 2. I nodded from behind my coffee mug. Have a safe trip. I expect you'll continue packing today. The question had an edge to it. Of course, I replied. I know how important it is to have the room ready for the kids. She seemed satisfied with that answer. There are some boxes in the garage you can use. I'll see you this afternoon. As her car backed out of the driveway, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For 3 years, I'd put her needs first, sacrificed my independence, compromised my future. All for family, all for love. And in return, I'd been labeled a parasite and discarded when someone more valuable came along. Not anymore. I watched until her car disappeared around the corner, then pulled out my phone and made the call that would change everything. Sullivan Residence, I said when the locksmith answered. Yes, 9:30 is perfect. Thank you. While waiting, I did a final sweep of the house, gathering the last of my personal documents, birth certificate, passport, the deed to my car. I found the folder containing the roof repair contract showing my payment, receipts for the new water heater and kitchen appliances I'd purchased, and 3 years of bank statements showing my contributions to household expenses. At exactly 9:35, a white van pulled into the driveway. A middle-aged man in a gray uniform approached the door. Miss Sullivan, I'm Tony from Secure Lock and Key. You called about changing the locks. Yes, thank you for coming so quickly, I replied, ushering him in. All the exterior doors, please. And I'll need 4 sets of keys. Tony nodded, surveying the entryways. Should take about an hour for all 3 doors. Any specific type of lock you prefer? Whatever is most secure, I said. Price isn't an issue. As Tony began working on the front door, removing the old hardware, Mrs. Fletcher from next door wandered over, curiosity evident on her face. Everything all right, Audrey? She asked. I'm a locksmith. Your mother mentioned you were moving out soon. Just upgrading the security, I replied with a smile. Mom's been concerned about the old locks. Mrs. Fletcher nodded, but her expression remained skeptical. I saw you taking boxes out to your car all week. Barbara said Jessica's coming back today with the children. That's right. Never thought I'd see that girl again after how she left, Mrs. Fletcher continued. Your poor father was heartbroken. And now she's moving back in with Barbara, pushing you out. She shook her head disapprovingly. I stared at her, surprised by her insight and apparent support. Everyone in the neighborhood knows how much you've done for your mother, Mrs. Fletcher said, patting my arm. Don't think we haven't noticed who mows the lawn and fixes the gutters, who drives Barbara to her appointments and picks up her prescriptions. Her words were unexpectedly comforting. Thank you for saying that. Truth is truth, she replied simply. Your father would be proud of you. And ashamed of this situation. She glanced at the locksmith again. You do what you need to do, dear. Some lessons need to be learned the hard way. With that cryptic statement, she returned to her yard, leaving me with a strange sense of validation. At least someone had seen my efforts, recognized my sacrifices. By 11, Tony had replaced all 3 locks and handed me the new keys. All set, Miss Sullivan. These are high-security locks. Much better than what you had before. Perfect, I said, paying him and adding a generous tip. Thank you for fitting me in today. Once the locksmith left, I called Rachel and Michael, who arrived within 20 minutes with Michael's truck. Together, we loaded my remaining furniture. The desk I'd bought in college, my reading chair, the bookshelf Dad had built me for my 16th birthday. You sure about this? Rachel asked as we carried boxes to the truck. It's pretty drastic. I'm sure, I replied. I've spent 3 years being a doormat. It stops today. By noon, the house was cleared of my presence, except for a few strategic items I'd left in my room. Enough to make it appear I was still in the process of packing, rather than completely gone. I took one last walk through the home where I'd grown up, where I'd cared for my father in his final months, where I'd supported my mother through grief. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place where I'd been used. We finished setting up my new apartment just after 1. It was small but cozy, with my familiar furniture making it feel instantly like mine. Rachel had brought houseplants and a welcome mat as housewarming gifts. Michael helped assemble my bed frame and hang curtains. Not bad for a rush job, Rachel said, looking around with satisfaction. It already feels like you. I nodded, emotions suddenly tightening my throat. For the first time in years, I had space that was truly mine. No one to criticize my decorating choices, question my schedule, or make me feel like an unwelcome guest. Thank you both, I managed. I couldn't have done this without you. After they left, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Mom, starting at 12:45. 1 voicemail. Audrey, we've landed and are heading home. Gerald is picking us up. Please make sure the guest room is ready for the children. Call me back. No, please. No, thank you. Just more demands. At 2:17 p.m., my phone rang again. Mom's number. I let it go to voicemail. A text followed almost immediately. We're home. Where are you? The key isn't working. I smiled slightly, imagining their confusion at the door. Another call. Another text. Did you change the locks? Call me immediately. 3 more calls in quick succession. Then a final text. This is completely unacceptable. We're standing outside with 2 tired children and luggage. If you don't open this door right now, I'm calling the police. That was my cue. I drove back to the house, parking across the street to observe the scene before approaching. Mom, Gerald, and 2 children I barely recognized stood on the front porch, surrounded by suitcases. Jessica was pacing, gesturing angrily. Mom was on the phone, her face flushed with rage. Gerald was trying unsuccessfully to peer through windows. The children, Emma, with long dark hair like Jessica's, Tyler, with a baseball cap pulled low, looked confused and uncomfortable. I took a deep breath and walked across the street, the folder of documentation tucked under my arm, new house keys in my pocket. Having trouble? I asked pleasantly as I approached. Mom whirled around, nearly dropping her phone. Audrey, what have you done? Why can't we get into the house? I've secured my residence, I replied calmly. As is my right as a legal tenant. What are you talking about? Jessica demanded, stepping forward. Though I hadn't seen her in years, she looked exactly the same, beautiful, angry, entitled. Mom said you were moving out today. Mom didn't provide proper notice as required by state law, I explained, my voice steady. Tenants are entitled to 30 days written notice before eviction, even family members. This is ridiculous. Mom sputtered. It's my house. Yes, it is, I agreed. And I've been paying the mortgage on it for 3 years, along with utilities, repairs, and maintenance. I've invested over $40,000 in this property since Dad died. Gerald stepped forward, attempting intimidation. Barbara asked you to leave. That should be enough. It's not, I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. And I have documentation to prove my legal residence and financial contributions. I patted the folder under my arm. My attorney says I have a strong case for both extended notice and financial compensation. Attorney? Mom looked shocked. You consulted a lawyer against your own mother? I consulted a lawyer to understand my rights, I corrected. After you withdrew $3,000 from our joint account without discussion. After you called me a parasite in the home I've maintained and paid for. After you and Jessica planned behind my back to displace me with 1 week's notice. Jessica rolled her eyes dramatically. Always the victim, Audrey. Mom needs help with the kids. I'm going through a divorce. Can you think of someone besides yourself for once? The irony of Jessica, who had contributed nothing for years, accusing me of selfishness was almost laughable. I've thought of others for 3 years, I replied evenly. I've put my life on hold to support Mom after Dad died. Something you didn't bother to do. I've paid bills, maintained the house, coordinated medical care, and been here every single day while you were too busy to even call on her birthday. That's enough. Mom interjected, glancing nervously at the children who were watching our exchange with wide eyes. Just open the door, Audrey. We can discuss this inside. We can discuss it right here, I said firmly. I'm willing to move out on proper terms, 30 days notice as legally required. Repayment of the $3,000 you withdrew from our joint account. And fair compensation for my investment in home improvements, including the new roof and water heater. This is extortion. Gerald blustered. This is business, I corrected him. You've treated me like a business arrangement rather than family, canceling our agreement unilaterally when a better option came along. I'm simply responding in kind. Mom looked around nervously, aware that neighbors might be watching. Fine, Audrey. Just, let's go inside and work this out. I pulled the new house keys from my pocket. I'll unlock the door, but I won't be staying. I've already moved my essential belongings to my new apartment. I'll return tomorrow to discuss terms. If we can reach an agreement, I'll be fully moved out within the 30-day period. You already moved? Mom looked genuinely surprised. But where? How? I made arrangements, I said simply, unlocking the door. Unlike some people, I don't expect others to solve my problems for me. As the door swung open, I handed Mom one set of keys. I've left detailed documentation of all my financial contributions on the kitchen table, along with a formal response to your verbal eviction notice. My attorney's contact information is included if you'd prefer to communicate through legal channels. Jessica pushed past us, ushering her tired children inside. This is so typical, Audrey. Creating drama when we're just trying to start over. I didn't bother responding to her. Instead, I looked directly at my mother. You called me a parasite, Mom. After everything I've done, everything I've given up to help you, that's not something I can forget. For the first time, I saw a flicker of shame cross her face. I was upset. I didn't mean, you meant it, I interrupted. And that's why I can't stay here anymore, even for 30 days. I'll come by tomorrow at noon to discuss arrangements. Please review the documentation before then. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked back to my car. Behind me, I heard Jessica already complaining about the state of the house, Gerald offering suggestions about changing the locks again, and the children asking questions about where they would sleep. None of it was my problem anymore. For the first time in 3 years, I was putting myself first, and it felt surprisingly good. 6 months passed in a blur of change and growth. My new apartment had become a true home, decorated exactly as I liked, with no one to criticize my choices. The promotion at work had come through, bringing more responsibility but also a substantial pay increase that made my independent life comfortable. The confrontation with Mom had gone better than expected. After reviewing my documentation, she'd been unable to dispute my financial contributions. Gerald, surprisingly, had been the voice of reason, perhaps recognizing the potential legal complications of fighting me. We'd reached an agreement, full repayment of the withdrawn funds, a fair division of the utility bills for my final month, and a payment plan for my investment in home improvements. Jessica had been furious, calling me selfish and greedy, but her opinion no longer held power over me. I'd spent too many years trying to earn approval from people who were incapable of giving it. I'd maintained minimal contact with my family since moving out, exchanging occasional texts with Mom about practical matters, but nothing more. Through Mrs. Fletcher, I heard that Jessica had already caused problems, failing to contribute financially as promised, leaving the children with Mom for days while she job hunted, fighting with Gerald over house rules. Your mother looks 10 years older, Mrs. Fletcher reported during one of our coffee dates. Running after those children, trying to keep the house up without you. Jessica's not much help from what I can see. I felt a twinge of sympathy but pushed it aside. Mom had made her choice. She was experiencing the natural consequences of that decision. My own life had blossomed in unexpected ways. With encouragement from Mrs. Kendall, I'd enrolled in evening business classes to enhance my credentials. I'd reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my caretaking years. I'd even started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but it was nice to remember that part of myself existed. Most importantly, I'd started the small bookkeeping business I dreamed of, working with local shops on weekends. It was growing slowly but steadily, bringing me both additional income and the satisfaction of building something of my own. Therapy had been instrumental in my healing process. Dr. Martin, a compassionate woman with shrewd eyes, had helped me recognize patterns of codependency and people-pleasing that had defined my relationships. "You spent your life trying to earn love that should have been freely given," she observed during one session. "That's not how healthy family dynamics work." Working with her, I'd begun to establish proper boundaries, process my grief over not just losing Dad, but losing the idea of the supportive family I'd thought I had. I learned that standing up for myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. One rainy Tuesday in October, I encountered Mom unexpectedly at the pharmacy. She looked tired, the lines around her eyes deeper than I remembered, her shoulders slightly stooped. "Audrey," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "How are you?" "I'm well," I replied, maintaining polite distance. "How are things with you and Jessica and the kids?" She hesitated, something complicated crossing her face. "Busy. The children are adjusting. Jessica is still looking for work. Gerald has been very supportive." I nodded, not surprised. "I'm glad to hear that." An awkward silence fell between us. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer. "Your business cards are at Marion's Bakery. I saw them on the counter when I picked up a birthday cake for Emma. You started your own business." "Just part-time for now," I confirmed, "but it's growing." "That's wonderful," she said, and seemed to mean it. "You always were good with numbers, like your father." The comparison to Dad, a rare compliment, caught me off guard. "Thank you." She glanced at her watch. "I should go. Jessica has a job interview, and I'm watching the kids." "Good luck to her," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Those children deserve stability." As she turned to leave, she paused. "Your room." "I mean, the room you had. The kids are sharing it now." Tyler wanted to know who the lady was in the photos on the bookshelf. "The ones you left behind." Her eyes met mine. "I told him you were his aunt. That you were smart and kind and helped people with their businesses." I swallowed the unexpected emotion rising in my throat. "Thank you for that." She nodded and walked away, her step a little slower than I remembered. That brief encounter reinforced what I'd been learning in therapy. That healing didn't require forgiveness or reconciliation right away. It required honesty, boundaries, and self-respect. Maybe someday our relationship could be rebuilt on healthier terms. Maybe not. Either way, I would be okay. In the months that followed, I continued building my new life, brick by brick. I expanded my client base, completed my business courses, and even took a weekend trip to the beach, something I hadn't done since college. I started volunteering at a financial literacy program for women leaving abusive relationships, finding purpose, and helping others recognize their own strength. My apartment became the gathering place for a small but loyal group of friends, Rachel and her boyfriend, Michael and his new girlfriend, coworkers who'd become confidants. We had game nights and potluck dinners, creating the kind of supportive community I'd always craved. One evening, as we sat around my living room laughing over cards, Rachel raised her glass in a toast. "To Audrey, who proved that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself." As our glasses clinked together, I realized she was right. I'd lost the illusion of family that I desperately clung to. But I'd found something more valuable. My own voice, my own boundaries, my own worth. The betrayal that had seemed world-ending had actually been the beginning of something better. By trying to discard me, Mom and Jessica had inadvertently set me free. The most important lesson I'd learned was that family isn't just about blood relations. Family is about mutual respect, support, and love. Sometimes, the family we choose, the friends who stand by us, the colleagues who believe in us, the neighbors who see our worth, is more valuable than the family we're born into. I'd also learned that helping others shouldn't come at the cost of helping yourself. That sacrifice is only meaningful when it's appreciated, not expected. That standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's essential. As for Mom and Jessica, I'd come to understand that their actions reflected their limitations, not my worth. Some people are simply incapable of giving the love we deserve. Accepting that truth was painful, but liberating. I don't know what the future holds for our relationship. Perhaps there will be reconciliation someday, built on new understanding and boundaries. Perhaps not. What I do know is that I'll never again allow anyone to make me feel like a parasite for existing, for having needs, for expecting basic respect. So, if you're in a similar situation, sacrificing everything for people who don't appreciate it, staying in toxic relationships because of obligation, putting everyone's needs before your own. Remember my story. Remember that you have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to be treated with respect. You have the right to walk away from people who hurt you, even if they're family. Sometimes the hardest person to stand up for is yourself. But it's also the most important. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you treat yourself.